Shamai! We're going to take a look at the walking bass line today. Now this is a bass lesson I've been meaning to do for ages, but there was a bit of prepping work to get backing tracks and things sorted. So I finally had a moment to do that. I do apologise, there hasn't been much bass stuff lately, but there is going to be a lot more very soon. So what is a walking bass line? It's basically a bass instrument, whether it's a bass ukulele, double bass, bass guitar, or even, a piano playing the bass line, playing even beats and walking the rhythm through each bar, normally 4 beats in a bar. So the bass player would be playing crotchet or quarter notes. Yes, when you get really comfortable playing a walking bass line, you can add extra bits and pieces, but for today I'm certainly going to keep it really, really simple, because ultimately it's the rhythm. This is one of the driving forces of music. So just before we actually play a walking bass line, the notes. I've just mentioned the rhythm, keeping these even beats. With the notes that you're going to play, generally walking bass lines are improvised. You sort of make it up as you go along. You're following a chord progression. I'm going to use a jazz chord progression for today's lesson, just because it gives a nice variety of notes as well. And often you find the walking bass line in jazz music, swing music, pop music. So the notes, you can play them as chords or arpeggios or triads, the 3 main notes of a chord. I will also show you a little bit about the extra notes of the chord a bit later. You can play them as scales, walking up and down, and I am going to be doing some bass ukulele lessons on scales very soon. And you can use what's called chromatic notes. In other words, notes that aren't necessarily in the key signature or scale, but gives a really nice variation to your walking bass lines. I'm not going to look at the chromatic notes or the scales today. We are just going to look at the chord notes to try and get you playing a nice basic walking bass line. So you need to follow a chord progression. I'm going to use the key of C today, but one of the most popular jazz chord progressions, which is the minor 2nd going to the dominant 7th or the 5th chord with a 7th, and then back to the root. In this case, rather than just C, it's actually going to be using C major 7 and C6. My God, she's just said a load of numbers and letters. Don't panic. Honestly, it's all going to become very clear. As I said, I'm going to keep this really simple, but there are a lot of things to think about doing a walking bass line, especially as you go more advanced, but we're keeping it simple today. So the first walking bass line, we're going to keep it as simple as it gets. We are just going to focus on the root note of a chord or the tonic. I'll explain a little bit more about chords in a moment. All right, but for now, this is as simple as it gets. If you've done my beginner bass lessons, I've done one that focuses on just the roots, and I've done one on octaves. All right, in other words, it's the same note, just higher or lower. All right, so this first walking bass line, when you look at the actual chords, you can see D, M7, D minor 7, G7, then we've got C maj 7, C major 7, and C6. Don't panic, you're just looking at the big letter. Again, I do go over this in my beginner bass uke lessons. All right, so for D minor 7, you're just going to play D. For your G7, you're just going to play G, and for your C major 7 and C6, you're just going to play C. Now you can see notes or notation. I will be doing a lesson on that very, very soon. And you can see the tab for now. All right, and hopefully you also know where the names of the notes are on your bass ukes on the fretboards already. So let's just start nice and simple. So we're just playing the root note. So when I see DM7, I'm just going to play D 4 times because it's even beats, quarter beats. When I see G7, I'm going to play G, and then C major 7, C6, I'm just going to play C. Let's just try it, and then I'll explain a bit more. And so on for a second. It's a little bit boring because we've got no beat. And part of what we're trying to do is to provide a steady beat or rhythm, but it's helpful if you've got something to help you as well. So the first way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use my drum machine. Brilliant bit of kit. You can download drum apps on your phones and tablets and things as well. And I've done backing tracks, which we'll look at in a minute. But just to keep it as simple as it gets, I'm going to put a nice steady jazz beat on here. And you might have noticed as well, if you look at the tabs, I'm not just playing. I'm using the octaves. Okay, so some of them are low, some of them are high. For the first bar, I'm just sticking to 1 bar of open D string. Okay, just to get us into it. Let's try it with the beat. You might have noticed on one of those phrases and I did just the straight notes without putting any octaves in, just to give you an idea. That's a walking bass line. It's a simple one, but it is a walking bass line. And especially when you're first starting out, keep it simple. It's much more important to keep those beats steady and keep in time than to fluff about trying to get notes and get them wrong sometimes, okay? Right, a second ago I mentioned backing tracks. They will be on the channel the same time this goes up, okay? And I've done them in different speeds. For now I'm just going to use one, but basically I've just put together some nice little piano chords and a nice drum beat. So same thing, but with a backing track. Just root and octave. So I mixed it up a little bit because at the end of the day, I'm putting all of this music, the notes and the tabs and the backing tracks with examples on only as suggestions. Okay, most of the time you could well find yourself just reading off chord charts or just know the letters, and you really are expected to make up the walking bass lines yourself. Chords. I am going to do a theory lesson on this. I think I'll have to, all right? I'm going to try and keep it simple. If you play ukulele or guitar, you're probably already very familiar with chords, or if you read notation. Basically, you're looking at a chord has got to be 3 or more notes, all right? We're talking chords, triads, arpeggios, the same sort of thing for today. Okay, so how do I play a chord? I play the first note of the scale. So let's look at C. All right, C, miss a note. The next note of the chord would be an E, because I've missed the D. So we've got C, E, miss a note, next note, G. C, E, G would be the notes of our C chord. D, okay, D, miss a note, F, miss a note, G, A. So D, F, A. Okay, if you're looking at it in front on a piano in front of you, it's actually much easier to visualize. Okay, I'm not a massive chord player on the bass, if I'm brutally honest. There are lots of people who are excellent at playing chords on the bass, but as a bass player, we need to know the notes in the chord, especially if we're working out a walking bass line, because that's going to give us the notes to play. So we're looking at the root and the third for this one. D minor would be D and F. G7 would be G and B. And the C chords, both C major 7 and C6, are going to be C and E. You can still use different octaves for both the root and the third notes, okay? And this is where you can get loads of variation, even just using a couple of notes. Let's get the backing track going. So root and third. So a slightly different but still very simple walking bass line, just using your root notes and the third of each chord. Roots and fifth this time, and again it can be any octave. All right, I'm keeping it nice and low and simple today, but if you are quite happy with a lot of the notes further up the fretboard, it's entirely up to you where you play them. We go back to, if you only read tab, it tells you where you've got to play them. If you read notation as well, or you know where your notes are on the fingerboard, it's entirely up to you which octave you play. Roots and fifths, I'm going to use my trusted drum machine this time. If you're paying close attention, you'd have noticed I mixed it up a little bit then. I was still looking what my notes were, but I wasn't always following what I was writing, because that's what you're meant to do, all right? I'm just giving these as examples as a starting place, okay? A really good tip as well. It's the same when you're reading, you don't tend to read just the word, you tend to read ahead a little bit. If you're driving, you tend to look at a few cars ahead of you. In music, you need to be keeping an eye on what is coming up, all right? Especially when you're playing a walking bass line, you need to know what note you are going to land on next, your next root note, all right? Yeah, you can play walking bass lines as well, using the notes from a chord in any order. But for now, especially if you're just starting out, I would say stick to the root at the beginning of each bar. All right, so in other words, if the chord is D minor 7, play a D at the beginning. All right, yes, once you know what you're doing, you can play around as much as you like, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible today. Right, so the last one I'm going to look at today is basically using notes from the chord. I'm keeping it simple, okay? On the actual backing tracks, you will notice that I've put the names of each chord on there, but I've put them in certain colours. So the first 3 notes are in red because they are the normal notes for the chord. However, for example, let's take G7, G, miss a note, B, miss a note, D are the 3 main notes, but that little 7 just means you were playing the 7th note of the scale. Okay, in this case, it's an F. So you could put the F into your walking bass line as well, and it would fit perfectly well. Okay, but that's what the little numbers are for. C6, C, E, G, and you want the 6th note, which would be an A. And it's all these little things that will make your walking bass lines eventually awesome, but for now, concentrate on keeping the rhythm and keeping it simple. Right, we'll go back to a backing track now to try the chord notes. Now what you may have noticed with that 4-bar phrase, you've got your C major 7, so I've used the C, the E and the G as the main bass notes, but for the C6 I've just popped a little A in there as well, so we could get that nice walking down. Ready for our next chord, the D. Alright, and this is where you can have so much fun with variations of walking bass lines, honestly. I just threw a couple of little what we call ghost notes and chromatic notes into that last one, just a bit of variety. I will do a lesson on that very, very soon with a different backing track to go with it as well. Keep them simple. Start it slow. Focus on keeping the rhythm, the beat, because that is the main job of the bass player with a walking bass line. Honestly, I promise you. Right, so the backing tracks. I've been playing them at slightly different speeds today. I think there's one quite slow at 80 beats per minute, going up to 140 beats per minute. Start them slow, and remember, you can always speed up and slow down videos as well. Now, there's quite a lot of information on that page. Okay, you're not meant to be reading all of it when you're practicing. First of all, you've got the actual chords, and I've popped a little moving box on there for you to know which chords to play. Below that, I've highlighted the chords and the note names for each chord. If you notice, they're in red for the main triad notes. And then on the other side of the page, I've basically put all the examples from this lesson. They are there just as suggestions, All right, if you haven't got a clue where to start and you're really not sure what notes to play, use them as a basic guide. But the whole idea is that you were meant to start to sort of make up your own walking bass lines using all the notes from the chords. There we go. I know it's a bit of a long lesson, but there is a lot to cover, even when we're keeping it this simple. There will be more bass videos coming very, very soon. I'm going to be looking at scales, key signatures. I might try and do a lesson on the circle of fifths. I'll get the whiteboard out again. And reading notation. I have recently done a video about reading notes in the bass clef, but this will obviously be focusing on our bass ukes. And of course, everything in this video can apply to bass ukulele, double bass and bass guitar. So now you've finished watching this, go and check out the back-in tracks. Having a chord progression and a beat really is very helpful when you're learning how to do walking bass lines. If you've got a comment or a question, please feel free to leave it below. Give us a like if you've enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. Thank you for watching.